friends, did you know that every year we have this amazing Black History Month in the chapel where the students have the opportunity to dress up as their favorite famous African American in history and then tell us about their story, their journey, what amazing things they did in America. I had never ever heard of Henry's Freedom Box until one of you amazing students taught us all about him. And I was just so thankful because growing up in the town that I grew up in, our history books really just didn't highlight a lot of famous African Americans or stories like this. The only story that I did hear about was Harriet Tubman and the amazing things she did with the Underground Railroad. I did learn about Martin Luther King Jr., of course, and the I Have a Dream speech, but there are so many African Americans that have done amazing things. And Henry's Freedom Box, this book is just gonna blow you away. So sit back, relax, and pay attention. You're gonna love this. I love reading books that give history and teach us something that really happened, and we can be inspired by these people. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves were not allowed to know their birthdays. Did you boys and girls know that? I didn't. See, even educators, teachers, even adults, we learn something new every day. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees, just like slave children are torn from their families. Oh, that breaks my heart. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very, very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe his master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Why do you think he didn't say thank you, my sweet friends at home? Probably because he didn't want to be a slave, right? He didn't want to be owned by somebody. He wanted to be free. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field and the leaves swirled in the wind. Boys and girls, I forgot to tell you the author of this book is Ellen Levine and the illustrator is Kadir Nelson, and these illustrations are gorgeous. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Oh no. That does not sound like good working conditions at all. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. My friends, why do you think Henry didn't sing in the streets? What could happen if they sang in the streets? I wonder why they weren't allowed to do that. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon, there was a little baby, then another and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Can you imagine as a parent knowing that your children might be taken away from you? I can't even imagine that. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No!" cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think, and he could not work. "Twist the tobacco," the boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. Oh, he was devastated. They didn't even warn him that this was going to happen. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves were tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father, father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy too was gone. So boys and girls, when slavery was allowed, slaves were just considered property. So they were sold just like you would sell cattle, clothes, and separating families meant nothing. So it was horrible, not fair treatment at all. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. And this is where his creativity is going to come into play. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky, and Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and hope," Henry said. He is determined, boys and girls. Now that is thinking outside the box. He is planning an escape route. I love it. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up with care." Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew that it wasn't enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitriol. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. So he had to hurt himself to get that day off of work so he can get mailed. The sun was not up yet when Henry climbed into the box. "Ready," he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed a paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Friends, do you think this was a dangerous trip? Could be very dangerous, because if someone found out that he was in there, I think he could get in very big trouble. So this could cost him his life, but he's so determined. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again, upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst, but he was afraid to move. someone might hear him. Boys and girls, look how uncomfortable he must have been in that box. I'm tired of standing, someone said. Why don't we move that box and sit on it, said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side, now his left. And suddenly he was right side up. So because they didn't know he was in the box, they moved it all around. What do you think is in here, said the first man. Mail, I guess, said the other. I am mail, thought Henry, but not the kind they imagine. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. I think he is brave. He awoke to loud knocking. Henry, are you all right in there? All right, he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Box Brown. Boys and girls, isn't that an amazing story? I got this book off of Amazon. It is Henry's Freedom Box. I highly recommend it. I learned so much, and I hope you did too. Have a great rest of your day.